Okay, so and I'm going to go back to basics a little bit because I think it's important to put a little bit of context around this. The EMIR regime came about following the financial crisis in the G20 Pittsburgh summit. And the G20 statement referred to all standardised OTC contracts being reported to trade repositories. It said nothing about ETD. Now, I'm not going to argue the rights and wrongs of ETD being included, but ETD were included at some stage in the process. They were included in a process that was primarily set up for OTC contracts, which led to 4 years of an absolute nightmare about trying to get ETD contracts into an OTC format. To give you one of the best examples, the field for maturity date. The field for maturity date is incredibly relevant to an OTC contract. An ETD contract doesn't have a maturity date. It has a last traded date and a settlement date. For the last 5 years, CCPs have reported one, clearing members have reported the other. Those fields haven't matched in 4.5 years for millions and millions and millions of reports. So that's just one small example about some of the square pegs and round holes we've had with ETDs. And again, Europe was possibly one of the only jurisdictions to introduce ETD. Again, it's very important to state, and this all comes back to a point I'm going to make at the end, EMIR is basically and primarily a systemic risk reporting regime. And I can't emphasise enough how much we welcome the changes that the Commission and the Council have proposed. However, there are still a couple of fairly big and major issues that we'd like to point out and get across to you to emphasise, again, some of the differences between OTC and ETD. And my next statement is that reporting of ETD transactions does not give regulators oversight of systemic risk in ETD markets. It doesn't. It simply doesn't. If you report individual transactions to a trade repository, you don't get the position. For an exchange-traded derivative contract, it is the position that is king. If I trade 10 times throughout the day, 10 lots, at the end of the day I don't have 10 trades, I have a position of 100, be it long, short, or whether they're buy or sell. You add and subtract, and at the end of the day you have a position of a total number of trades, and that position is your systemic exposure. The transactions tell you nothing. All the trade repository would have to do is try and recreate the position from the transactions, which complicates matters irrevocably. That's a simple but important distinction to make between ETD and OTC contracts. Again, it's the position that matters. And from the get-go under EMIR, there has been no requirement to report the positions. Firms have been reporting the positions for the last 4.5 years, simply because we have to. To give you an example as to why, EMIR requires the reporting of life cycle events. Life cycle events happen on an interest rate swap. They are fixed. They can be they can increase the notional can increase in size, it can decrease in size, it can be transferred to someone else. With an ETD, that doesn't happen. With an ETD, if you're long a position, if you're a longer trade, you sell it the other way to get out of it. You don't actually do anything on the individual transaction. It all happens at a position level. So again, I know I'm sounding a bit like a stuck record, but it is the position that is king, and that comes back to an important distinction I'm going to make at the end. I can't actually believe I did this, but that last line has got a mistake in it. And again, unlike the difference between ETD and OTC, OTC contracts are traded bilaterally and confirmed bilaterally. ETD contracts are not. They are traded on a centralised order book and done on a regulated market or an exchange. That is then given up to a CCP for clearing. That CCP holds a golden record of the position, not the transaction. CCPs do not hold transactions, they hold positions. That needs changing, and I will change it and get it out to people. So again, the CCP again holds this golden source. It is the position. The firms have to adhere to what the CCP says. Oh, wrong way, sorry. Again, just to emphasise another point, ETD transactions, they are a child to the parent position. Can't keep emphasising this enough. Effectively, what happens is the transactions at CCP level fall away. It's all about the position. And again, position data gives regulators systemic risk for ETD markets. Now, the costs and operational risk involved in reporting on all these transactions over the last 4.5 years have been momentous. They have been huge across all market participants, from the smallest firm to the largest firm. And again, I can't emphasise enough how much we support the changes that are being made to reduce the smaller counterparties, the changes that have been proposed by the Commission to move to CCP-only reporting. it comes on to that last line. The regime could be simplified with millions of needless transactions with no loss of systemic risk or oversights as long as positions are being reported. Now this leads me on to sort of my final argument, if you like, my final points. The proposals that have been made by the Commission and then the Council, the Commission proposal was extremely welcome that it moved to a CCP reporting only regime. It made no mention, however, of the client side of this transaction. CCPs, in effect, have a clearing member. That clearing member has two accounts at that CCP. It has a house account, it has a clearing account. Now, on the house account, obviously that's their proprietary business. They will get systemic risk for that clearing member. On the client side of it, they could have 10, 1,000, 100,000 clients sitting behind that with a position. And the regulators will not get that breakup of position unless the CCP is told who those positions are held by. And for that, the clearing member has to give the CCP the information. Now, that in itself would be incredibly problematic to implement off the back of the Commission proposal. Then I move on slightly to the Council proposal, which tried to address that and mention the fact that the CCPs would have to be given that client data if the regulators required it. Again, that is incredibly problematic to implement from a clearing member perspective to try and get all that client data into the CCP. Again, the Council proposal suggested that should the clearing member wish to continue to report transactions, they could. It is the continued use of the word transaction in the proposals that is generating my fear. There is a distinct difference between transactions and positions. The slightly funny thing about this whole situation is the solution is already in place. If regulators want client-side data, clearing member firms are already reporting their positions to not to CCPs, but to trade repositories. I'm sure Matthias can confirm to you, even now, all of the clearing members are sending in positions for their clients. By best guesstimate, if we moved from a transaction-based reporting regime to a position reporting regime, you would potentially remove somewhere in the region of 95, 96%, and that number is slightly plucked out there, but I can get firm up on that. You would remove high 90s% of reports from transactions and immense operational cost and risk. So, as I say, the message I'm trying to give to Vincent and the regulators now is the solution is already in place as long as you're happy with the position-based reporting regime.